I want to introduce you to two people who you have seen off and on so far today, who are students, graduate students in the School of Human Communication Disorders. And their names are Carissa Izzard-Wells and Elspeth McLaughlin. And both of them have been introducing speakers, but they've also been very involved in organizing this conference as well, along with the whole diversity committee within the School of Human Communication Disorders. So thank you very much to them.
Dr. Lucha, and he is a founding member of the School of Labor Studies at McMaster University. He's currently Leuna Enrico Henry Mancinelli Professor in Global Labor Issues in the School of Labor Studies and the Department of Economics. In 2011, he completed a project examining the health effects of precarious employment titled Working Without Commitments, Precarious Employment and Health. He is currently the co-director of a 5-year joint university community research program on poverty and employment precarity in Southern Ontario, or PEPSO. This is a joint initiative of the School of Labor Studies at McMaster University and the United Way Toronto. PEPSO released its first major report titled It's More Than Poverty, Precarious Employment and Household Wellbeing in 2013. In the spring of 2015, PEPSO released a follow-up report called The Precarity Penalty. The reports can be downloaded at www.pepso.ca. He holds a BA and an MA in Economics from the University of Toronto and a PhD in Economics from the University of Cambridge. And the title of his talk today is Precarious Employment and Precarious Life, the Case for a Guaranteed Annual Income.
Okay, I assume everybody can hear me, so thanks for being here. It's really marvelous. Everything I'm going to talk about today is a product of joint research. This has been a marvelous partnership between myself and the United Way Toronto. And in many ways, it was the United Way Toronto that got us onto this project based on some research they did back about a decade ago. And so Michelle Lafleche, who's my co-partner at the United Way Toronto, and Stephanie Prosek there is involved in this as I am, but as usual, I'm not a politician and I don't work for the United Way, so whatever I say is my responsibility, so don't put it on them. This is the kind of economy that we have decided to study. It's one where you get a job, it comes along, it pays you some money. If you don't get a job, well, you don't get any money, and that's the way life is, and you just have to get on with it. I would argue, I'm going to talk a lot about a 1970s economy versus one that's a 21st century economy. And the focus of our study is to try and understand what are the social implications of the labor market and the economy we have today compared to the economy we had in the 1970s. So I grew up in Windsor. Windsor was a 1970s community. And I grew up in a 1970s household. My dad had a unionized job. He got it the week after he came back from his honeymoon. He retired from that job. It provided him with a bit of a pension and allowed him to die in dignity the last days of his life. Mom, for the most part, stayed at home. But then when she was tired of us, which was quite quick, she went out and she worked part-time. And it was a household that had some stability, some security. There was never a ton of money, but there was enough. There was never a sense of insecurity. I moved to Hamilton in the 80s. And Hamilton then was still a 1970s community. There were 13,000 people that worked at Stelco. Today there's 600. Each of those jobs, and almost all of them went to men, almost all of them went to white men, but each of those jobs supported a household, and if a woman was lucky enough to get attached to one of those men, she got some of those benefits. Now, that didn't always work all that well for women, but there you are, that's the way that economy was. And the children that were produced from those unions they had a certain amount of stability and they could develop as they did and flourish in the society. That society is gone. That's not what we have today. What we have today is what we've been studying, a precarious labor market. It's a labor market in which people shouldn't expect to retire from the job that they had coming out of school or university or graduate work. They're increasingly in jobs where they shouldn't expect to have a pension. They shouldn't expect to have a regular stream of income. Increasingly, work is project-based, short-term, temporary, sometimes very well paid, but rarely going on for a lifetime. The kind of jobs that my dad had just, for the most part, don't exist anymore. And what we're trying to understand is what are the social implications of that kind of economy. But what can we learn from that kind of economy about a guaranteed annual income? Well, what we're arguing is that poverty has two dimensions. One is you just don't have enough money, right? And that, I think we can understand that pretty easily. That's really a 1970s idea. You don't have enough money to pay your bills. But a 21st century idea is that your income is variable. So the problem there is you don't have enough money at the right time. So sometimes you may have a lot of money, but other times you don't have any money. And the problem is, if you get yourself locked into rent, or you get yourself locked into, even worse, a mortgage with the banks, you can't go to the banks and say, I'd like to have a variable mortgage, in the sense, not that the interest rate goes up and down, but the payments go up and down. You don't have that kind of an option. And so increasingly people are stuck with an irregular flow of income and a rather regular demand for costs and expenses in their lives. And so the question is, what are the social implications of that, and where does a guaranteed annual income fit into that? So as it was said, we released a couple reports. These are all available on our website. Actually, I brought about a dozen copies. Now that was a 1970s idea. I thought this was going to be a seminar. It's fantastic. There are hundreds of people here that are interested in this issue. It's a real mark of where we are in this debate. So the first report, we released it in 2013. It basically made the case that the labor market has fundamentally changed. It's no longer just low-wage jobs that are precarious. It's no longer the jobs that immigrants take on that are precarious. It's no longer jobs that women take on that are precarious. Clearly, if you're a woman or an immigrant, you're more likely to be in these kind of jobs. But these kind of jobs now are spreading at all levels of our economy. And many of the jobs that are precarious can actually be quite well paid. I employ a lot of precarious workers in my projects because my grants are time limited. I get money for 2 years or 3 years. In this case, it was 5 years. That was a real luxury. But when that money runs out, those jobs end. There is no other money for my researchers after that. And so increasing at a university, probably about 2/3 of our employed people are on time-limited jobs that end and have a fixed end date. If you work in high tech, if you work in software, if you work in media, if you work in the arts, all of these jobs tend to be time limited. They're not jobs that go on for 20, 30 years. Sometimes they only go on for 3, 4, or 5 months. And that is increasingly the nature of the labor market. And that's the case we made in our first report. Second report, which we released in 2015, extended the analysis to look at the social implications of that kind of a labor market. What does this mean for families? What does this mean for starting a family? What does this mean about thinking about having children? What does this mean about participating in your community? Can you fully participate in your community if you have that kind of irregular income? And so what we've done, and I'm not a politician, I'm actually a researcher, and so I see my task is to provide evidence, data, that can be then used to formulate demands and shape policy. So I'm a bit data-driven. I hope that doesn't bore you completely. I'll try and guide you through this, but there's going to be a lot of data that I'm going to present, which makes the case we have a new economy, we need new policies, we need to move away from the 70s. And I'll make just sort of one point. I have a lot of friends on the right. After listening to you, you might think that's kind of an exaggeration. I do have friends on the right, and they think we're still in a 1970s economy. I try and dispel them of that idea. I have a lot more friends on the left. They think we're going back to a 1970s economy. They're both wrong. It's the 21st century, let's get on with it. We need to change a whole set of social institutions. How we train people, how we support people, childcare, pensions, health benefits. These programs are all put in place in the 70s when the labor market was different. right now we need to change all of those, and basic income, I would argue, is going to be a central plank in that transition. So what we did is we collected a lot of data. We did over 4,000 surveys in both 2014 and 2011. We did a lot of interviews with people in precarious employment, and what we were looking at is people between the ages of 25 and 65. So young people were not in this. That's a whole different experience of labor for those folks, and people beyond 65, who also many are in the labor market. We weren't looking at those. We're looking at people in their core earning years. The first question we have to address is, well, how do you measure precarious employment? What is that thing? Well, one way you can look at is by the form of the employment relationship. Are you a contract worker? Are you part-time? Are you self-employed? Do you work through a temp agency? That's one way to look at it. And the problem with that is there's a whole lot of people who are in those kind of jobs who I wouldn't call them precarious. They can be extremely well paid. Their skills can be in high demand, and so they go from contract to contract to contract. Right? You know, if I was 6'4" and could play basketball, I probably could get a number of short-term contracts with a number of basketball teams, perhaps. That was actually my initial job aspiration, but that fell short, obviously. The other problem is there's a lot of people who are in, quotes, permanent jobs. They're not so permanent anymore. That they think themselves as permanent, but those jobs are really time limited, and there's a lot of insecurity. So those folks who used to work for BlackBerry, they thought they had it made. Well, poof, those jobs are gone. And increasingly that is the nature of the labor market. There is no long term for most people. So what we did is to try and get a better handle on this, is we developed what we call the Employment Precarity Index. And this is an index which we use to rank jobs based on their characteristics. And the index is made up of the 10 questions along here at the side, and these are from our survey. And we basically, when we asked people about these characteristics of their job, and we added it up, and basically what we did is those people who scored the highest on these 10 questions told us their work is not stable, they work on call, they're paid in cash, they're not paid if they miss work. Those people, the top quarter, we call those the precarious, and the people at the very bottom who scored basically 0 on these questions, they answered no to everyone, those are the secure folks. So I'm lucky enough to be a 0 on this index, but contract instructors, researchers on my projects, they would score certainly much higher. Quite important, income is not part of our index. And I want you to start thinking about precarity as not just not having enough money. Obviously that's an element of precarity. But in the 21st century, precarity is increasing about variable income. Income going up and down, up and down, up and down like a yo-yo. And so what our study can do is it can look at 2 dimensions of poverty. One is not having enough income, and the other, your income going up and down, up and down, up and down. And what are the implications of that kind of a life? So let's just start with the data. What we did with our index is we divided our sample into 4 categories. From the most secure, that's the people in secure employment, to those in precarious. Each of those categories represents about 1/4, about 1,000 of our 4,000 individuals. Right, so the precarious, they're the ones that told us, my job is temporary, my hours fluctuate, I don't know if I'm going to have a job in 6 months, I don't get paid, if I miss work, I don't have benefits. The secure, well, tenure fact. What you can see here is obviously there is a real income penalty associated with being in precarious employment. So this is from our 2 studies, one in 2011 and 2014, and what you can see is that people in precarious employment between the ages of 25 and 65 make about half of what somebody in a permanent secure job makes. Not terribly surprising, perhaps more important, they live in households that also make less income. So that 1970s household, 1 person with a secure job, 1 person with a precarious job, that was my family's household, is being replaced increasingly by households where both people have precarious work. And therefore, both people have low income, both people have very low income, And people in secure employment increasingly are tending to partner with other people in secure employment. And so therefore their income remains high. So what we have now is not only lower income for the precarious, but I'd suggest we also have increasingly precarious households. And precarious households have implications for the well-being of the household, implications for how they interact with community. So as well as low income, there's this problem of variable income. So this is a useful example here. We've taken our full sample, divided it into our 4 bins, the 25% who are the most precarious, the next 25%, the next 25%, and the 25% who are most secure. And this is basically the percentage of people who said how much income varied from week to week in the last 12 months. So the precarious, they make less, and they're never quite sure what their income is from week to week. It's going up and down. Again, it's the same 4 categories: precarious, vulnerable, stable, secure. And this is, are you paid if you miss work? Well, if you're in secure employment, of course you're paid. You know, I get the flu, I get paid. You know, that's not a problem. Almost everybody, or in fact everybody in our top quarter of our sample gets paid if they miss work. If you're in precarious employment, you're low paid, your income is varying, and if you miss work, tough luck for you, you don't get any income. Right? So how do you make the rent? Benefits. So what if you need some medication? What if your child needs dental work? What if they need eyeglasses? Well, if you're in secure employment, making a lot of money, in households that make a lot of money, you also have benefits. So these things don't come out of your pocket directly. You have that extra insurance. If you're in precarious employment, low income, don't know what your income is from week to week, not paid if you miss work, and if Jane gets her teeth knocked out playing hockey, well then it's on you to find the money to fix Jane's teeth as a result of playing hockey. They don't get benefits. Retirement, right? We will all retire. So again, here you are, you're in the secure group, you're paid better, your income doesn't vary from week to week, you're paid if you miss work, you get an extra supplement if Jane gets her teeth knocked out and you need to replace them. And oh yeah, you'll have some income for retirement as well. If you're in precarious employment, retirement is on you, right? You've got to find your own way of getting to that. And increasingly, that is the nature of our labor market. And I would suggest to you, well, we've identified 25% of people in precarious employment. That line is moving up. More and more people are going to look like those precarious groups as time goes by. And fewer are going to look in the middle categories and perhaps even in the top category. And I think that speaks to the need for societal change. So as I indicated, our interest was really the social implications of this. Obviously, if you've got that kind of low income, insecurity, lack of benefits, no pension plan, nothing to support your kids if they get their teeth knocked out, that's going to have some social implications. And this is just an example of a woman, university education, in this kind of situation. This was one of our aha moments, and I just want to spend a moment looking at this. This graph, we're intersecting precarity and income and poverty. So we've taken our 4,000 people and divided them using our employment precarity index in half. The half with the highest scores are insecure, the half with the lowest scores are secure. And then we looked at 3 different levels of household income. Those folks who are making less than $60,000, keep in mind this is in Toronto, that's a tough budget to live on. Those people who are making 60 to 100, that's a middle income household, and those making over 100,000. So we've now got 6 different categories based on these folks are precarious and making less than 60,000 as a household. These folks are in the middle, these folks are high, up here more secure and high income. Right? So tenured professors are luckily up there. What this graph says is, to what extent does precarity in employment bleed into the household? How does it create anxiety at home? And not surprising, if you're not paid very much and you're insecure, that's a real problem. That brings all kinds of tensions into the household, and I'll leave it to your imagination what that might mean for the well-being of the household. What really surprised us is if you look at this middle income less secure group, so these are folks who today are making $60,000, $70,000, $80,000, but they don't know if they're going to be making $60,000, $70,000, or $80,000 next year. They may be on a well-paid 6-month contract. Who knows what happens after that? There's also a lot of stress there. There's a lot of bleed from that insecurity into the household. Again, this is using exactly the same framework. So we've got our less secure, more secure, low income, middle income, high income. And here we're looking at, can they meet their debt commitments? Again, what you're seeing is that quite a surprise, not a surprise down here. If you're low income and precarious, you're really in trouble. If you're low income but more secure, well, you know, you get by. It's not great, but you get by. But quite important, if you're in that middle income precarious group, you look a lot more like your low income precarious than the low income secure. Right? And again, I mean, what's going on here? Well, this is people who say, well, look, I had a good job, and you know, I committed to living in a neighborhood, I committed to having children, and we know the demands of children are not variable. In fact, they're quite constant, going up all the time. And now all of a sudden my income has disappeared, or it might disappear, and therefore I'm really concerned about, you know, about meeting my debt obligations. I don't know if I'm going to be able to sustain this. Same thing about maintaining living standards. So maintaining living standards is not just about the low income less secure, it's also about the middle income less secure. And again, if we think that a lot more people are going to be moving from this bin, which is the more secure middle income, into this bin, the less secure middle income, then again, the societal problems in this new labor market go well beyond just some people not having enough money. It's also more and more people not having enough money at the right time. And that is the nature, increasingly, of our labor market. From an economist's point of view, this is actually quite a frightening chart. It asks, does your employment situation affect spending decisions? And again, what you're seeing is that, not surprising, if you're less secure and low income, absolutely, you're really thinking about major expenditures because you don't have the money. But people in this less secure middle income are equally concerned about making major expenditures because they're just not quite sure where they're going to be next year. So your child wants to go to camp. You can afford it this year, but maybe you better not send them to camp because you may need that money to feed yourself next year. Right? So it's got all those kinds of knock-on implications. And we know that our economy is stalled, and our economy is stalled because people are afraid to spend money. And corporations are afraid to invest, but people are afraid to spend money. If we don't spend, then the economy doesn't have an engine to keep it going. So again, I would suggest this precarious employment is holding back our economy because people have this insecurity. Precarious employment can affect children. This is, we asked here, can you pay for activities outside of school? One thing we found is that parents, no matter what their income is, they sacrifice to provide what the kids need at school as best they can. But it's these things outside of school. Can the kids play hockey? Can they get music lessons? Can they go to camp? These are the kind of things that we know develop children and allow them to be better citizens and get ahead in the world. What we can see is that certainly income matters, but so does insecure employment. If you look at each of these categories, so this is the low income, less secure, more secure. Well, if you're less secure, you're less likely to be able to do that. But again, if we look at these two categories, again, the less secure, there's a problem there, that they're unable to provide for their children. So children growing up in households where income is insecure are penalized compared to children living in households where income is secure. And again, that's not a direction that we want to go in. Quite important when we're concerned about participation in community. Again, what you can see here is that there's something going on about the ability to have friends. Here we ask, do you have a friend at work who you could ask a favor of? And again, the problem here, if you're working 6 months here, 3 months there, you're coming and you're going, you don't develop those kind of workplace friendships that you might call on for support if you need it, whether that is just to have someone to talk to, someone to have talked to in a moment of difficulty, etc. And again, you can see that it's not just the low income less secure that have a problem, but also it's the middle income less secure. There's a problem having friends, and that can have all kinds of negative implications. So what does this mean for the family? Well, what it means is that people who are in precarious employment are likely to delay forming relationships. So I don't know how many people said to us, look, there's no way I'm getting into a permanent relationship. I don't have a permanent income. So I just kind of, I'm waiting my turn before I get into a relationship. And likewise, having children, again, what we can see is that if you're in precarious employment, you're a lot less likely to start a family because you're just not sure where your income is. So population growth is lower, and that is potentially an issue. And this slide, mental health, and not surprising, if you're in precarious employment, you're more likely to report you have poor mental health. And Senator Eggleton has been a big supporter of our work. He comes to all of our launches. Of course, it's a big issue that he is interested in. A lot of people say, well, yeah, sure, people with some mental health problems, they can't hold a full-time job, that's why they're in precarious employment. I'm not buying that argument. I think more likely what's going on is the other direction. People in precarious employment are just so stressed, there's tension in the household, that they become ill as a result of that, and that's what we're seeing in this case. So it's got health implications as well. And again, it's not just the low-income insecure who report elevated health problems, but so do the middle-income, less secure report mental health problems. So think of this group as okay today, not so clear where I'm going to be tomorrow. So when we interview them, they're doing fine, but behind, in the back of their mind, they're saying, I'm not sure where I'm going to be tomorrow. And that's creating anxiety at home, stress, holding back their children, and for many leading to mental health issues. So there are practical solutions to what's going on. I said, I'm actually an economic historian by training. I'm actually not an economist. I think that's fair to say. I'm actually an economic historian. And so I understand that things have to change. I also have to be frank, I think in terms of decades and centuries, I know some of the people here thinking about tomorrow, I actually think in terms of decades, and I think what we're going to see is a gradual set of fundamental changes in how our society is organized. In the short run, we need to talk about building a dynamic labor market that supports workers in precarious employment. A lot of that's about training. How do people get training so they can move up jobs rather than being trapped in precarious employment? Because employers, for the most part, have abandoned training. Why would they train someone who they're only employed for 2 or 3 months? They just don't invest in them. So where do workers get that investment? Well, we found out the only way they get it is by paying for it for themselves. So I think we need that. We need to ensure that jobs are a pathway to income and employment security. So we need a new framework which guarantees people, once you're in the labor market, you've got some rights to that job, or you have rights to a job, and you can get on with your life. And we need to enhance social and community supports because this is a new labor market. So how do kids get these activities outside of school? Where do people get childcare? Where do they get the kind of benefits they need? All these things need to be addressed. But it really comes back to the issue that this conference is about. A guaranteed annual income can be part of the solution. In fact, I suggest it can be a very big part of the solution. It's a part of the solution because we're not in the 1970s. This is a solution for the 21st century. I'd suggest to you, it's not a question if we have a guaranteed income, it's now only a question when. I think that's the only question that's left on the table because we really do have to move forward in this direction. Certainly, a guaranteed annual income, however we're going to define it, it can lift people in low-income households to a living wage, right? And I think that's an easy thing to understand. People who don't have enough money, you give them a supplement and they can have a decent life. I think that's easy to understand. I think what's more difficult to appreciate is that while it's of special importance to low-income, precariously employed individuals, it also has relevance for middle-income, precariously employed. If you believe, as I do, that this is probably where new jobs are going to emerge in the 21st century, and if you believe, as we've shown, that people in this situation have elevated stress at home, are delaying forming relationships, are delaying having children, are more exposed to mental health, then what a guaranteed annual income do, it can smooth out the bumps. So income is going to go up and down. What we're seeing is that in the troughs, these folks are in trouble. So what a guaranteed income can do, it can work through those troughs and it can reduce the stress, the anxiety. It can allow them to invest in their children, and we can have a better society. Let me just close. Can we afford it? Again, as an economic historian, I do look at long-term trends. And some people might be surprised or not surprised to know, in the 1920s, income or productivity per person increased about 2 to 3% per year in that decade. In the 1930s, despite the Depression, it increased about 2 to 3% per year in that decade. And it did so in the 40s, and it did so in the 50s, and it did so in the 60s. Every one of those decades, on average, income increased 2 to 3% per year. There's little ups and downs, but over the decade it increased about that much. And in every one of those decades, the average income of workers increased 2 or 3%. So the two lines tracked each other. How much we were making, how much we earned. It may surprise you more to know in the 1980s, productivity kept increasing 2 or 3%. In the 1990s, per year, 2 to 3%. In 2000, 2 to 3%. And right now, each year, on average, it's increasing 2 to 3%. Some years a bit more, some years a bit less. What's changed since 1980 is the income of the average person has flatlined. So today, the average person makes what the average person made at the end of the 1970s. So those lines have now deviated. And where a basic income and a guaranteed annual income, where we fund it is by closing that gap. We've been producing, we are a wealthy society, we just need to share it more equally. So I said our stuff. Our two reports are available online, www.pepso.ca, both the executive summaries and the full reports, which each of them are about 100 and some pages, full of data there that can bolster the case that we need some fundamental changes, and I'll stop there.
Not only outlining the current situation and that is very distressing, but also moving to what possible solutions there may be. So, we have room for a couple of questions.
Thanks. My name is Brittany Lee. I'm the interim leader for the Green Party of Nova Scotia, and we've had as our policy guaranteed annual income for years. And so we fully embrace the need to move in this direction. One of the questions that we face a lot, and we have our ideas, and I'd love to hear yours, is what kind of time frame from a historian's perspective is reasonable to make a full transition from where we are today into a fully operational guaranteed annual income system?
Yeah, I don't buy lottery tickets either, so it's hard to predict that. Here's I think my understanding from history is that change comes suddenly and at unexpected moments. So we made the transition from the pre-Great Depression economy, almost no unions, no pension plans, no health care, no support, to the post-Great Depression economy, the alleged New Deal, within less than a decade. In 5 years, a whole new set of policies were introduced. Unions spread through the economy. Pension plans became a reality and expectation. The role of the government in smoothing out unemployment became a reality. So it can happen quite suddenly. We have seen in the last decade incredible changes in South America. From an incredible, well, still corrupt in some places, but a really quite a dismal society to one which is a lot fairer in a number of ways. And I don't think anyone would predict those changes 20 years ago, but they happened suddenly. So I think the change can be done in a surprisingly short period of time. None of this is rocket science. This is just not. It's not complex. It is a question of putting money in people's pockets. It's a question of accepting we have the money to put in people's pockets, and then watching the economy prosper. And I think that's exactly what will happen, because people will be able to spend their money, not put it in the Cayman Islands in tax-free accounts, and that is what is going to generate.
Go ahead.
I just have one question. Some of what you're talking about, how unions rose and helped people out, that do you tie
I mean, I think absolutely, that's a factor. Okay, the question was, has the decline in union, both in terms of how many people are in unions, but also the decline in the ability of unions that represent people to actually get better conditions, how important is this in terms of precarious employment? Absolutely. I think we can look at 3 big shifts over the last 20 years, or 30 years that have led to this. One is the shift in power, and the decline of unions is part of that. It's also the increasing confidence of those people in the top profiles to assert their power in their own interests, and that's the 1% I think that we're seeing. Issues of globalization and how we opened up competition to the globe, and that has really undermined many unions and made it difficult for certain groups of workers. And third, I think that we have to respect, we've moved from a 70s economy where it was steel workers, it was auto workers, it was people in manufacturing plants. Those steel plants are not easily moved around the globe. You can move production, but not the plant itself, to a service economy where now a lot of those jobs can be done anywhere. And I think, and they tend to be, by their nature, project-based. And so I think a combination of all those factors has contributed to the economy that we have, but it also means why we're not going back to the 70s. We're moving forward. But I do think in moving forward, different forms of unions will play an essential role. My argument is, and this is not very popular with my union friends, but I think that employers have abrogated their responsibility to fill in the social wage. They don't do training, they don't provide benefits, they don't provide pensions. I think unions have to think about that as their new function. And I think the model they should look at are the construction unions, which for decades have done exactly that. It's the construction unions that give their members new skills. It's the construction unions that collect money from employers, put it in a pool and provide pensions. That's come with some problems, to be frank. But the unions have played a bigger role, and I think that's a direction unions will go increasingly in the future.
We have time for just one more question.
So my question is, if you give people a guaranteed wage, does that allow employers to say, well, we don't have to think about benefits or all of that because you guys got that, and I don't think you're going to change the precariousness of it, like the other stressors that you talked about.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think these are important questions, and I think we do have to think about them more, but I think we need to remember that the reason employers employ people is not because they're nice, they may be nice, but they employ people to make a profit. And so I don't think that's going to change. And if you want to make a profit, you're going to pay for workers who are the most productive. I think that's actually a good thing. So we move increasingly people into productive jobs and they'll be paid because that's how the market system will work. So I think we're still going to have a private economy out there, and that private economy will be driven to hire people because those people can make money. I think if we have a situation where people have some stability, some security, that unions are reinvigorated, then I don't think there's any reason to assume that that will simply drive down wages because people have a bit of a guarantee. Perhaps quite the contrary. You can now tell as an employer, forget it, I'm out of here. This is just not representative of the sacrifice I'm making, so actually wages could actually go up, and they could better reflect the productivity of individuals. I think the problem we have right now is that wages no longer seem to reflect the productivity of individuals. I think we need to find a way in which our very productive citizens can make a wage that reflects their very large productivity. And I think a guaranteed annual income can actually be positive on that rather than negative.
Okay, I'm afraid that that's all the time we have for questions for Wayne for now, but remember that Wayne will be part of the panel and question and answer at the end of the conference. So we have another chance to ask. So thank you very much, Wayne.